Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Work in Progress with me, ProxyDamage. Today we're going to be talking about balance again, but with a slightly different twist. Today's topic is failure to balance, or specifically how bad balance decisions or bad balance changes can make or break some characters' very core and their very design, right? So let's just start off the bat that I don't envy the balance team's job in that sense. Like it is not an easy job. First of all, you have to decide what is worth balancing, what is actually imbalanced, what is being told, what people are just complaining about because they haven't realized how to play against it or something like that. And that by itself is not easy, right? But we're gonna disregard that side of things right now. Today we're just gonna talk about the things that are confirmed, like things that let's just agree that they were unbalanced and they needed to be changed. When that happens, how do you change them, right? When a character is decided, no, this character is too strong or too weak or something like that, it needs to be changed. It's the way you do those changes that can be very, very impactful. And if it's done in the wrong way, it can break a character, and it has in the past. This has actually happened several times, and that's the point. Let's start with I think is the most the oldest and most telling example of this, right? At least for me, this might have happened before, but I wasn't playing the game back then, so I don't know, right? It was Zeus, right? For those that weren't playing the game around then, Zeus had like a streak of about a year where he was considered top pick, top ban, and for the longest time nothing changed. He just kept. It was the same. He he received nerfs actually, and received multiple nerfs, but he still kept being the number one character, arguably, for the mid lane. And in that year, in the year that he was the top dog, so to speak, of the mid lane, he received damage nerfs, cooldown nerfs. I think he received some range nerfs and everything, like in the lightning bounce and everything. But that never fixed the character because that wasn't the problem. And here we get to the like primary topic of this discussion, or one of the primary topics, which is before you balance the character, you gotta realize what's broken about him. And a common complaint with Zeus is that he has too much damage, but he didn't. Like, arguably, he might have had a little too much base damage compared to other mages. Like, if you match up the numbers that he had then and that other mages had, he might have had a little too much base damage, but it wasn't like he was doing more damage with his skills with his entire kit that other characters couldn't do at all. The problem was, in my opinion, and based on everything that we've seen since, hindsight being 2020 and all, is that his kit was too easy to confirm all of its damage, right? It's not just, it's easy to land a hit. It was easy to land all of it. Once you landed something, you landed all of it. And that was the problem. And it was easy to land because I'm assuming most people have, if you're reading this, if you're hearing this, I mean, you probably have seen, Zeus. You probably know what Zeus is. Is is chain lightning. It's very easy to land on someone if they're near a minion or if they're near anything. Otherwise, just normal skill shot. And if you land that, everything from there becomes very easy to confirm because if like the bouncing lightning can bounce off of minions, can bounce off teammates, which makes it a lot easier to hit someone. The number two is just a self buff; it doesn't do damage. But detonate cannot miss. Detonate cannot possibly miss. It either works or it doesn't. So from the point on when you have any stacks, detonate is a free hit, and his ultimate is a massive AoE that's very difficult to miss. Sure, you won't get like 30 hits on someone because it doesn't even last that long, but you won't get a lot of hits, but you will get some hits guaranteed because it's so big. So what a lot of people could do to basically guarantee a gigantic amount of damage. Most times it was a kill if he was a sort of a squishier enemy that wasn't full health. Was if you get a lightning bounce, if you hit the character, the enemy, and it bounces off to a minion and backwards, which happened relatively common in lane. It was relatively common in lane, and sometimes in team fights as well because people are next to each other. It happens. The lightning bounced. You only had to hit that because once you hit that, once someone had two stacks, you might even hit them with a basic attack if you want to. Two stacks, you throw the ulti on top of them, which almost immediately does 1 point of damage, or 1 point damage, one lightning damage, which stacks the passive. Three passive stacks. You can't miss detonate, which back then stunned. Nowadays, if you're a newer player, nowadays detonate slows the enemy. Back then, if you have 3 stacks, back then if you had 3 stacks, it stunned you for like 2 seconds or something like that, which was quite a lot. But the problem was that everything put together. You had a character that barely had to hit you, and once he hit anything, the rest would just sort of train in together, right? You hit one basic attack and one chain lightning, and they were dead. Because then you'd put the ulti on top of them, which was a massive AoE. You couldn't really miss it. As soon as any part of that ulti hit, you stun them for 2 seconds, and they're inside your giant ultimate, taking a lot of constant damage and taking basic attacks, which in Zeus' case did a little extra damage because of his passive. So you're basically dead. On top of the chain lightning damage, on top of the detonate damage, which was high, you're basically dead. So the problem was never that Zeus had a lot of damage specifically, it was that he could make sure he landed all of his damage really quickly. In a team fight, he would do like a chain lightning, and from that point on, like you'd guarantee an ultimate on a lot of people because it's huge. That's just what it does. And detonate, because detonate can't miss on anybody that has the stack thingy, the passive stack. And that was the problem for Zeus. And we saw that because after a while they decided, well, alright, maybe Zeus is at his time in the throne, and they nerfed his stun. They removed his stun. It's just now it is a slow, and that broke his kit completely. You haven't seen the Zeus in serious play in months. Not really doing months, probably a year actually. Well, every once in a while someone brings him out like, oh, I can play Zeus and it's a character, and you get a little bit of a free pass because people forget how to play against him because you don't see him anymore. That's it. That's just it. But there isn't much of a reason to pick Zeus right now because they broke him. The kit is broken, and be, not just because he lost his stun, which sort of broke the kit, which just the kit just needs to be remade, in my opinion. But because before that he had a whole slew of nerfs, from damage to range to cooldowns to all of that, that were never addressing his real problem. But once you remove that, that's just nerfs to the character. That's just nerfs the rest of the character didn't necessarily need. Arguable, but whatever. Another interesting example around it, like Zeus is a good example of ignoring the main problem, which was how easy it was to land the stun, which then confirmed basically the rest of his damage. It was the synergy between the stun, the damage, and how easy it was to land any of his skills, and how difficult it was to miss, basically, if you want to go about it. Right? He didn't really have a lot of counterplay. It was about cost of opportunity, if you want. You have a different character right now that was released a few months ago, if I remember correctly. That is a similar problem, which was the Newa, as some people say. Newa was released, the new character, ironically, because the old character was broken. She could basically ignore the game and backdoor and PV, and you couldn't do much about it. You had a time limit on the game. You either won. Once she got to that critical point, which wasn't that difficult because she could farm. Once she got that critical point, which with I think 2 items, which was Obsidian Shard and Demonic Grip, I think, or Obsidian Shard and one more item. I don't remember what it was off the top of my head. Once you got that, she could just melt towers. She was invisible, so you couldn't really see her on the wards, or you just saw a tiny red dot. Most of the time, you'd miss it. She was difficult to catch because she had a movement speed. She could remove the backdoor protection. She could stun from towers by herself. She could stun them. She would the only skill that could damage. She would melt towers. There are actually SPL games where she melts the tower in Phoenix in 3 seconds or something like that. It's ridiculous. So she needed to be remade. Her new kit, arguably, at least in my opinion, is considerably more interesting. The only problem is she has one skill that breaks her entire kit from a balance perspective. And as long as that skill doesn't change, the balance team is sort of forced to break the rest of her design of her kit, which was her ultimate. For a game like Smite that's so based around the aiming and dodging and juking and that side of play and counterplay of things, which it is, that's one of the big allures of Smite. That's one of the big things that Smite pushes for, which is fine. That's Smite. But for a game that pushes that so much, she has an ultimate. She has the Karthus ultimate from League of Legends. She goes up in the sky, she hits everybody on the map. It's impossible to dodge. You can deny it with Aegis, but you can do that to literally every attack in the game. It's everybody on the map basically. That's it. It just hits it. You can't dodge it. You can't do anything about it. You just get hit, which means that that is a very problematic thing in Smite for the balance team, because how do you balance a skill that is 100% guaranteed to hit? Like Zeus was arguably very difficult to balance because most of his skills were very easy to hit. Now you have Nuwa with a skill that can't miss. The player can't miss and the enemy can't juke it. Nothing, you know. That is a very big problem. So what happened? Well, they basically just kept taking her damage off. They took damage off the ultimate, they took damage off the rest of the things. They basically just kept nerfing her to a point where you don't see her much anymore, do you? She has a stun. The stun is good. She has a magic shred and a root passive, and that's it. She, as long as she's viable, as long as her ultimate does something, she's gonna be too strong because her ultimate can't miss, and she's gonna top the damage charts because as long as her ultimate is up, she's gonna either burn invulnerabilities on the entire enemy team or just confirm all of that damage. And then that's ridiculous, right? So because of that, the balance team, as long as that design doesn't change, the balance team is sort of forced to break her on the negative side of things, right? And that's why you haven't seen Yua in a while. That's why until her ultimate is changed, I'm convinced she won't be balanced. She'll either be too good or too bad. Another different character that I think is a good example of this is Nox. Let me start by saying that I love Nox's design when she came out. You could argue that maybe some of her numbers were too low or too high or whatever, but I love Nox's design, especially her ultimate. Her ultimate for me was like one of the most interestingly designed ultimates in the game, because she gave you a choice. She put the enemy player in an interesting choice. You have, let's say that before anything else, hard CC in this game, in Smite, 2 to 3 seconds is generally the higher limit of things, right? For example, a silence shock is an ultimate. No, as a silence, 3 seconds of silence as an ultimate. Hades, which is a guardian, they get a little more. They get how do I put this? Not necessarily more stats in the. If this was an old fashioned RPG, guardians had a higher bar for CC, so they get more CC than other classes by default, and he gets a 2-second silence. 2 seconds of hard CC in this game is generally the top half for a strong ability, and 3 seconds, 3.5 for an ultimate is generally how it goes. Nox's ultimate gave you an option, right? She hit you with a skill, I don't remember the name of the ultimate, and for 5 seconds you could either not use any abilities or take a fair bit of damage every time you did, right? So the option was either you're silenced for 5 seconds, which is actually a very long time, or you can opt out of that silence by paying with health. You pay that sort of task I forgot the word, doesn't matter. You pay for that toll, that's it. You pay for the toll with health. And if you didn't do any abilities, if you just took the ultimate head on, so to speak, then it didn't do a lot of damage. Did mediocre damage, it like 70% scaling or 75 or something like that, and I don't know, like 200 something, 300 base damage. It's basically a normal mage nuke if you didn't do anything else. But if you did any skills, it suddenly the damage escalated exponentially, just blew up out of proportion. If you do as much as one skill, like one leap or one blink to get out of the ultimate, it immediately did about the same damage as a normal mage ultimate. Something like 500 something, 600 base damage and 140, I think, I don't remember, scaling. So it's actually more than normal mage nuke. But you had that option. If you could take the damage and then you didn't have the silence, right? So From a design perspective, this is an amazing ultimate. It's very interesting. It's not a hard CC because again, 5 seconds of hard CC is huge, but and it's not like a lot of damage on itself. It gives you the option: either you take a very long CC, or you opt out and take a fair bit of damage. By putting this decision on the enemy player, like if you just put these numbers by themselves, if you give this option to Nox, then it's broken because she can this really could escalate to a really high amount of damage, and it was a little difficult to hit, but they balanced that further. They made it a little faster. That's okay. But as that was a lot of damage, and 5 seconds of silence is too much. But by giving that choice to the player receiving it, you create a very interesting kind of counterplay where both options are very strong, but by allowing you to choose which one you prefer to take, they're mitigated. And so they're actually very interesting. In lane, she also had a very interesting design. Well, she didn't do burst damage. She couldn't really burst you down, but she would chip you down over time because she had more range than you. Skills were very easy to hit because it will buy you Jerry or the poke, the constant poke, and she basically just chip you down. Now, you could argue that some of her numbers were a little lower or a little higher, mostly on the lower. Most of her damage numbers, especially on the base damage side, were a little lower. But she had a problem from day one, right? Anybody that played her then knows, which was she had no defense. Her passive didn't really do much for her, and she had no defense. This is a very big problem for a mage because people, she's difficult to kill, or you can just jump on her and kill her. Especially assassins with basic attacks and hunters, they just ignored her completely because the only minor form of defense she had was silences, and those didn't matter for her. Her shield didn't do much. She was supposed to rely heavily on her shield for defense, but her shield wasn't enough. Her shield it wasn't good. It wasn't a good ability, right? So from an offensive point of view, she might have needed a little bit of a tuning, but what she needed was some help defensively. What the balance team did in that sense was give her more damage, which basically made her a different flavor of Anubis. No defense, all in, absurdly high damage. They changed their ultimate. Now her ultimate is a guaranteed stun and does damage, and so in my opinion, they broke her design trying to balance her by avoiding the problem of her survivability. Actually, I think the issue was designed by KP. It doesn't really work for high res anymore. Unfortunately, I like the designs. But one of the things he said, if I remember correctly, is that she's supposed to have a very reactive, very sort of almost fighting game style parry, defense. The shield lasted very long, but it's supposed to give her the defense if she times it just right. But it didn't. It just wasn't strong enough. It didn't do enough to justify that. And in my opinion, what you could have done to fix that would be to change the shield, like to make sure that it would get a much lower cooldown. First of all, that it could block basic attacks as well, or like it would get a much lower cooldown if you parried something, because it was just 1 second. You only the shield was only active for 1 second. Nowadays it's 2 seconds, I think. And until that part was fixed, all they did was basically give Nox more damage, more damage, more damage, where they only made her appear in competitive play by basically breaking her damage point, where she was able to do so much damage, and then her ultimate hit a lot of people. At one point, her ultimate was AoE, which was absurd, and I think it already had the guaranteed stun. And so, like, point being that instead of changing that, they tried to work around the problem, never really giving her the fix she needed. And when she did get that fix, which may or may not have been enough, they changed the passive, which was very good, and they changed the way the shield works. But now she's just sort of in a weird, awkward place design-wise, because she's had to deal with all of these other changes, trying to fix the problem of her survivability by giving her a lot of damage, a lot of reliable damage, by boosting up her normal the crow thing that fires forward that give her a silence. Now it's like 2 seconds or something like that. So she's now stuck in a bit of an awkward spot where she's very difficult to balance because her numbers are just ballooned and inflated out of proportion to justify that other side of her that wasn't working. And in my opinion, she lost a lot of it. Like, she immediately, that was one of the first things she lost, was her very interesting ultimate, because now it guarantees the stun, and that creates a lot of power, a lot of guaranteed power that makes it very difficult to balance. But I'm not gonna keep bragging on Nox. There's another character. I think there's a recent example of it. Medusa. Now, Medusa was originally designed as a caster assassin, right? She was arguably the first carry designed to not be a simple basic attacker, right? She was a physical ranged carry. I'm not going to use AD carry because that only makes sense in League of Legends. A physical ranged carry that was designed to be to be closer to a mage, to focus most of her power in her basics. Now, this was a little bit on the upper side, on the upper side of strong. Still convinced that if people people were overvaluing a little bit over early power strength, but she was definitely too powerful. She was definitely too powerful. Her skills did a little too much damage at the start, or actually did a lot too much damage at the start. Far too much damage at the start of the game and all that. Right, whatever. But the way they fixed that is the one that bothers me. Right? Because instead of fixing other aspects of her, which could have been changed, she, for example, nerfing her basic attacks or nerfing a synergy with crits, for example, just buffing her reliance on her skills, right? You can make skills not escalate, sorry. You can make skills scale very well. There you go. Sorry, I'm missing the word. You can make skills scale very well towards the late game by giving them good actual number scaling, physical scaling, or making the scales themselves crit, or doing a number of other things. So she could still have been, could still have been. There you go. English is difficult today. A caster, assassin, basic attack carry sort of thing that they wanted her to be, but they didn't. What they did is that they basically consistently nerfed her casting side. They nerfed her poison shot thingy. They nerfed the acid spray like 2 times now, and they nerfed the dash damage, which admittedly was a bit too much, but whatever. They nerfed. The point is that they nerfed all of her skills, other than I think the ultimate. I think that's the only one. To the point where now she's basically bland. They broke her design. She's no longer a caster assassin carry, right? She's basically just another normal AD carry with a different shape of lane clear and a different kind of steroid, but at the end of the day, it does the same thing. In the early game, you clear with your lane clear, and you try to bully your opponent with your skills, and as the game progresses, you have one sort of nuke, AoE nuke thingy that's not as good as a mage but still does good damage. You have a semi-steroid, and you have a dash. There you go. That's basically all the fucking... that's all the other hunters in the game. Some don't have movement ability, some have other things, but a utility skill if you want. There you go. That made her much more bland. She plays much more like any other hunter in the game, which is, in my opinion, detracts from the game. In my opinion, you could have much. That is one of the problems in Smite right now. Again, in my opinion, all of this is in my opinion, obviously, that you have a very limited variation of design, especially in the hunters. All the hunters do the same thing, as I said. Like, they have, with very little changes, they have one big impact ultimate, one survivability skill, usually a dash, one steroid or extra utility skill, and one wave clear and poke. Wave clear and poke, that's it. It's not. It wishes something to be desired. Leaves something to be desired, right? Not wishes. Again, English, difficult today. So, my hope is that moving forward, there can be a little more attention to what needs to be nerfed, what needs to be buffed, and what needs to be looked at specifically, and less trying to work around the problem and breaking the character's design by that. And you're saying, well, Proxy, but what do you mean in the future? Because let me tell you, today I'm not going to talk about Ratatoshker, or whatever his name is, the flying goddamn electrical mouse, because unless his numbers change a lot, he's going to be nerfed very recently or changed. Because right now, here's how you play Ratatoshka. You get the acorn thing, the acorn upgrade that makes them sticky bombs. You either ulti, probably ulti because the ulti has more startup and does nice damage when it lands. You ulti into someone, it's very fast. You ulti into someone, does a lot of damage. You shotgun them in the face. You might want to dash through them one time if you feel like it. Otherwise, if you try to run away, otherwise just shotgun them in the face and dash away. They can't get you, and they're gonna explode because it does 1,000,000,000 damage in this ridiculous upgrade. And I don't know. It's normal that new characters when they come out are unbalanced, or that characters will eventually fall into meta because the meta shifts and items change and everything else changes. So some characters might become unbalanced in context. My hope is that eventually, like Hi-Rez will be a little more careful with their balancing, affecting their design. Because these four examples are characters that have been broken by balance. They've been broken by their design has been broken by the balance. Except Nua. Nua is the other way around. Her balance is broken by her design. I guess you could say that to Zeus as well. Zeus is both. Zeus has been both. Zeus is everything. Everything bad right now. Fantastic. And that's it for this week, guys. Let me know what you think. Is this better? Like, I'm trying to be a little more dynamic, a little more interesting when I speak. Is this better? What do you want to see here? Let me know. Take care, and thank you for